Let's get right into it, shall we? Welcome to the fifth and officially the final part of our explainer diving deep into the 2026 EU customs reform. Over the past few sessions, we've unpacked exactly why this massive overhaul is happening in the first place and how global data flows are fundamentally shifting. But today we are finally answering the one burning question that's probably on your mind. Look, we all absolutely love the convenience of modern e-commerce, right? Just a quick tap on a smartphone, and a few days later, a dirt cheap package from China lands right on your doorstep. It practically feels like magic. But with these sweeping new EU regulations rolling right toward us, that magic is about to be heavily regulated. So the big question is our digital shopping trip to the Far East about to get incredibly expensive? And when the dust finally settles, who exactly is going to pay the bill for this entire reform? Here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with rules and reality, then move into who pays the bill, uncover some sneaky hidden consumer costs, take a specific look at the Canary Islands case, and finally give you our final verdict on 2026. All right, let's jump straight into Section 1, Rules and Reality, and what we like to call the iron law of economics. You see, before we can even begin to talk about consumer prices, we really have to ground our expectations in this iron law of economics, and that is the simple fact that regulations do not exist in a vacuum. Every single new rule, every extra checkbox on a digital customs form, and every single new data verification step requires intense effort. And effort, quite simply, costs real money. These expenses don't just vanish into thin air. We are absolutely not talking about just printing out a few new administrative forms here. We are talking about gigantic, tangible investments. E-commerce platforms are going to have to build completely new software solutions from the ground up. They have to program flawless, real-time connections directly to European customs authorities. And they need to build massive, entirely new departments strictly dedicated to compliance and risk management. This is a monumental operational undertaking, and somebody, somewhere in this economic chain, has to fund it. Which brings us nicely to Section 2. Who pays the bill? Let's look at the supply chain domino effect. So picture this as a giant chain reaction across four major players in this e-commerce ecosystem. On one end, you have the small, independent merchants. Next up, the gigantic tech platforms that actually host them. Then you've got the global courier and logistics companies. And finally, at the very end of the line, there's us, the everyday consumers. Now, it's a real shark tank out there, and every single player in this sequence is going to fight tooth and nail to protect their own profit margins. To put this into perspective, imagine a standard €100 product. When you break it down, it becomes super clear how these new compliance fees are going to systematically eat into traditional profit margins step by step. The base manufacturing costs, those remain entirely unchanged. But suddenly, there's this massive new slice of the pie being taken up by platform IT and compliance. Well, that new slice has to displace something else, right? And that immediately squeezes the margins of the merchants. So, how are these players actually going to react in the real world? Well, in scenario 1, the massive tech platforms could simply swallow the costs initially, just to keep us customers happy and loyal. But let's be real for a second. No massive global corporation is going to voluntarily sacrifice their profit margins forever. So scenario 2 becomes highly likely. The platforms will coldly pass that financial pressure directly down the chain to the small sellers. And this is going to squeeze the profits of those independent merchants so intensely that many of them will likely be forced out of the EU market entirely. What you're left with, ultimately, is a market where only the biggest fish survive. Then there's scenario 3, which involves the couriers. Obviously, logistics companies have to massively upgrade their IT systems too. Now, the easiest route for them would be to simply pass those costs on to us through higher shipping fees. But here's the catch. The global logistics market is a fierce, cutthroat shark tank. The competition is just relentless. Because of this, couriers might actually be forced to offset these new costs through incredibly smart automation and massive efficiency upgrades. Basically, they're going to try to absorb the blow technologically long before they ever dare to raise the delivery fees for the end consumer. Let's move on to Section 3. Sneaky hidden consumer costs, or as I like to think of them, stealth price hikes. Because despite the platforms and couriers fighting it out, it's the everyday online shopper who will most likely end up quietly footing the bill. Make no mistake, you aren't going to see a giant, glaring red customs tax boldly printed on your checkout screen. Instead, these price hikes are going to come sneaking in through the back door. The costs will be cleverly and subtly woven right into your shopping experience. For example, that handy little €2 USB cable you usually grab without thinking, it quietly becomes a €3 cable. It doesn't seem like a huge deal on the surface, but mathematically, that is a massive percentage jump. Those wild, constant 70% off flash sales, they're going to become noticeably rarer. Or very likely, the hurdles for free shipping will just change. Where you used to get free shipping just for tossing €10 worth of stuff in your card, you might suddenly find yourself needing to hit a €35 minimum threshold just to avoid delivery fees. Sneaky, right? All right, let's look at a specific regional example in Section 4, the Canary Islands case. This is macroeconomics on a micro level. What happens when massive, top-level EU rules violently clash with local realities? Well, you get the Canary Islands. You see, the EU mainland operates entirely on a harmonized digital tax system known as iOS. But the Canary Islands, they are not part of the harmonized EU VAT zone. Instead, they use a local tax called IGIC, and everything runs through a completely separate, distinct IT system called VexCan. And here's the kicker. These two completely different digital systems absolutely do not speak to each other by default. So these global billion-dollar platforms suddenly have to make a choice. They're essentially being told they need to build incredibly expensive, custom-tailored software bridges just to serve this relatively small regional market. If these corporate giants decide that the required investment is simply too high or just not financially worth the hassle, things will get incredibly uncomfortable for the residents of the Canary Islands. We could be looking at a terrifying return to manual customs clearance nightmares, the dreaded DUA process. We could see absurdly high minimum order requirements put in place just to justify the administrative headache. Or worse, we could see outright delivery bans for specific zip codes, which is a phenomenon we are actually already starting to see glimpses of today. Which leads us to our fifth and final section, the final verdict on 2026 and truly the end of an era. To summarize what this entire 5-part journey ultimately means for you, if you take away just one single thing from this entire explainer, let it be this. The chaotic, unregulated magic of millions of invisible, small packages flying under the radar into Europe, it's permanently over. The EU is officially trading in this total chaos for a highly organized, strictly data-driven, and inevitably more expensive system. By 2026, the platforms will absolutely hold all the power and the leverage, but they're also going to bear the full, unmitigated legal responsibility for every single item crossing the border. So, here is the million-dollar question I want to leave you with. As we inch closer to summer 2026, the most critical thing we need to watch isn't just what's written on legal paper in Brussels. The real question is, how will the massive e-commerce giants, players like Amazon, Temu, and AliExpress, actually implement this in the real world? Will these tech titans swallow these gigantic costs with gritted teeth? Will they cleverly hide them in our digital shopping carts through higher minimums and subtle price hikes? Or will they simply cut their losses and freeze out highly complex logistical regions like the Canary Islands entirely? Rest assured, we are going to be keeping a very close eye on exactly how this unfolds. Thank you so much for joining us on this explainer journey, and we will see you next time.